My name is Mark, and life had been, by most accounts, perfectly predictable. For years, I held the position of IT lead at a bustling marketing firm, where my skills kept the company's operation seamlessly running and my reputation secure. My wife, Lucy, was a constant whirlwind of charisma and charm, a natural fit for her role as a customer ambassador. We were, on the surface, an ideal match. Our lives intertwined with shared projects, jokes that only we understood, and the kind of bond that others envied. At least, that's what I thought. We shared our lives with Emma, 13, who had my keen sense for problem-solving and a streak of fierce independence, and Daniel, 11, who wore his heart on his sleeve, sensitive to the world in ways that often reminded me of Lucy. Our weekends were often noisy affairs of soccer games and cycling through the park, followed by meals where laughter bubbled freely over stories of who outran whom or whose team scored the winning goal. Those moments made the long hours at work worth it. But Lucy's job was a mystery wrapped in charm. She described her role as a blend of client relations and event coordination, and while she was a social butterfly, I often wondered what it really entailed. I didn't dwell on it. Trust was the bedrock of our marriage. Yet, something had shifted in the past few months, a subtle change, like a crack appearing in the foundation, almost invisible until it was too late. The first sign came on a Tuesday, buried in the normalcy of our daily routine. I was poring over reports late into the evening when Lucy breezed into the room, still wearing her work dress that clung to her as though it had been tailored for a gala, not a day at the office. Her hair was tousled in that effortless way that drew attention, and her blue eyes sparkled under the soft light. "Long day?" I asked, half smiling as I scanned for the usual signs of exhaustion. She hesitated, her expression flickering into something unreadable before she crossed the room and kissed my cheek. "Exhausting, yes. But productive," she said, voice bright but hollow. Before I could press further, Emma burst in, brandishing a math workbook and a plea for help. The moment passed, and Lucy slipped out of the room with a brief, almost relieved glance back. Days passed, and work consumed us both. The marketing firm was thriving, thanks to an influx of high-profile clients, one of whom was William Fellows. His name surfaced often during meetings, always spoken with reverence. Wealthy beyond imagination, he was an heir whose businesses sprawled across industries like an empire. Rumor had it that securing him as a client would elevate our firm to new heights. Lucy, with her sharp instincts and captivating presence, had been working with him closely, often recounting his charm in passing comments that should have sounded innocuous. "Did you know William flew in with his own sommelier today?" she'd said one night over dinner, eyes wide with amusement. "Can you imagine being that particular about wine?" I'd laughed along with her, the thought so absurd it seemed laughable. But I noted the way she smiled when she spoke his name, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Still, I ignored it. Why wouldn't I? Our life, our shared history, was steeped in trust. The second sign came more forcefully. 2 weeks after that conversation, Jack Edwards, our CEO, called an emergency meeting. The firm was to host an exclusive weekend retreat on a private island owned by none other than William Fellows. The event promised to be lavish, a strategic play to solidify his business with us. "Mark, you'll be going as part of the IT team," Jack said, glancing at me over the rim of his glasses. "Lucy, of course, will be there as William's primary contact." She flashed a professional smile that turned just a little warmer when Jack wasn't looking. "It'll be great for the firm," she said later, catching my eye with a look I couldn't place. The island turned out to be everything promised. We landed on a private jet, the engine's hum subsiding as the island's panoramic beauty unfolded beneath us, sweeping white sands, turquoise waters, and a mansion whose sprawling verandas whispered luxury. William stood at the top of the stairs as we disembarked, every inch the host with a predatory smile. He welcomed us with a handshake that was firm, eyes dark with the kind of confidence that came from never hearing the word no. Lucy's enthusiasm was palpable. She lingered at William's side, her laughter ringing out above the gentle crash of waves. I stayed back, trying to suppress a feeling that had no place in our marriage. It wasn't until later, as I watched Lucy talk to William under the orange glow of the setting sun, that I realized what it was: jealousy. That night, the island transformed under the stars. Drinks flowed, laughter cascaded down from the veranda, and the hum of whispered conversations pulsed like a heartbeat. I caught glimpses of Lucy moving between guests, her dress shimmering as she slipped into the current of easy conversation with William. It felt as if the distance between us was growing, an unbridgeable gulf forming where there should have been none. When she finally returned to our room, it was well past midnight. She smelled of salt and citrus, eyes bright and cheeks flushed. "Everything okay?" I asked, the question heavier than I intended. She nodded, a beat too late. "Of course. Just talking shop with William. He's ambitious." I managed a smile, masking the gnawing doubt that stirred inside me. As she settled beside me, sleep eluding her, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the weight of that doubt pressed down, harder than before. The second day on the island brought an uneasy quiet. The morning sun cast long shadows over the glistening bay as we gathered for breakfast on the veranda. The atmosphere was suffused with the kind of forced cheer that lingered after a long night of too much wine and whispered conversations. Lucy, wearing a sundress that fluttered in the breeze, sat beside me but seemed miles away. Her eyes kept drifting across the table to William, who, with his casual yet commanding presence, acted as if the island was his own kingdom. Our host stood to address us, a half-smile creasing his tanned face. "Today, we relax," he declared, raising a crystal glass. "But tonight, I have a special proposal for my esteemed guests. One that promises to make this weekend truly unforgettable." The gathered directors and their partners chuckled, nodding with the practiced ease of those used to navigating the whims of powerful men. Lucy's gaze caught mine, a fleeting moment of uncertainty passing over her expression before she quickly looked away. The subtle crack in her composure sent a ripple of unease through me. I tried to shake it off as we broke into smaller groups, each couple wandering toward the activities planned for the day, kayaking, snorkeling, sunbathing. Lucy chose to join a group heading to the lagoon for swimming. I, burdened by my restless thoughts, took a walk along the shore instead. The sea hissed and rolled, indifferent to the tension that churned within me. As I watched the waves recede, footsteps crunched on the sand behind me. I turned to see Jack Edwards approaching, his face lined with the seriousness he reserved for boardroom negotiations. "Mark, you all right?" he asked, squinting into the sun. The casualness of the question caught me off guard, and I nodded quickly. "Yeah, just soaking it all in," I said, forcing a smile. Jack nodded but didn't leave. "Listen, I know these trips can be more than they seem. Just keep an eye on things," he added, his tone cryptic. Before I could respond, he clapped me on the shoulder and walked off, leaving me more unsettled than before. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I watched Lucy float on her back in the blue-green water, her laughter ringing out as one of the other women splashed her. William's eyes followed her too, his expression thoughtful. It took everything in me not to confront him, to shout my suspicions into the open. But I held back, wary of turning a gut feeling into a scene. As the evening approached, the island transformed once again. Tiki torches lit the pathways, casting flickering light across the sand. The dining area was set up under a canopy of stars, and the air buzzed with the anticipation of whatever William had planned. I sat at a table with Lucy, who was wearing a stunning red dress that caught the light with every movement. Her smile seemed genuine, but I couldn't shake the memory of her earlier glances. Dinner unfolded in a symphony of fine food and murmured conversation. Wine glasses clinked, and forks scraped plates, but I barely tasted anything. My eyes drifted to William, who was deep in conversation with Jack. Every so often, William's eyes would cut across the room to Lucy, a connection that made my stomach churn. As dessert was being served, William rose from his seat, drawing all eyes to him. "Friends," he began, "thank you for indulging me this weekend. Your presence has made this place feel alive again." He paused, his eye sweeping the room before landing on me. "But now, I must speak to a matter of personal importance." A hush fell over the gathering. The clatter of forks and whispered conversation ceased. William's gaze shifted to Lucy, who stiffened beside me, her knuckles whitening as she gripped her napkin. "I'd like to make an offer," he said, voice steady and deliberate. "To Mark and Lucy. I propose that Lucy spend the rest of the weekend with me as my companion." The silence that followed was suffocating. It pressed down on my chest like a weight, freezing me in place. I heard the words, understood them, but it was as if my brain refused to process their meaning. "I assure you," William continued, undeterred by the stunned expressions around him, "this is not without its rewards. I am prepared to deposit $100,000 into your joint account for the privilege." The blood roared in my ears. Anger flared, hot and bright, obliterating any semblance of rational thought. I pushed my chair back, ready to confront him, but before I could stand, I felt Lucy's hand on my arm. "Mark," she whispered, eyes wide and pleading. There was no shock in her voice, only a strained desperation. I looked at her, waiting for the denial, for her to laugh and call this what it was, an obscene, impossible jest. But the laughter never came. Instead, she looked at William, then back at me, and whispered, "We should consider this." The ground shifted beneath me. The room, with its glittering lights and polished smiles, dissolved into a blur. All I could see was Lucy, her face a mixture of guilt and resolve. A memory surfaced unbidden, the two of us on our wedding day, her vows whispered with trembling lips, eyes full of promises that now felt as hollow as the echo of my heartbeat. The betrayal wasn't just in the offer, but in her willingness to entertain it, to look at me and expect, what? Understanding? Agreement? William watched us, his expression unreadable. The silence deepened, filled only with the sound of the ocean outside and the ragged intake of my breath. The security guard stepped forward, a silent reminder of William's power should the conversation turn confrontational. I clenched my fists, forcing my voice to steady. "You can keep your money," I said, each word scraping like stone across my tongue. "This ends now." Lucy's hand fell away, her eyes glistening as if she'd lost something she could never reclaim. William's smirk faded, replaced by a cold, calculating gaze. I stood, the legs of my chair scraping the stone floor. "We're done," I said, to no one in particular, but meaning every syllable. The silence that followed my declaration carried a weight that seemed to bend the room inward. Faces turned away, pretending not to witness the unraveling scene, as if their polite indifference could erase the moment. Lucy's eyes welled up, but no tears fell. They clung stubbornly, reflecting the amber glow of the tiki torches, as if she could force herself to remain composed. William's jaw tightened for a brief moment before he resumed the mask of affable detachment, leaning back in his chair as though observing an inevitable, if regrettable, outcome. The security guard relaxed his stance, and I noted his gaze flitting between William and me, calculating the risk. I turned, willing my feet to carry me away from the table, from Lucy, from the gathering of colleagues now reduced to silent spectators. Each step felt heavier than the last, a slow-motion march away from the life I thought was mine. The path back to our room was a blur. The soft roar of the sea seemed to mock me, its relentless rhythm uncaring of the turmoil churning within. I shoved open the glass doors to our suite, the cool air inside a sudden slap against my flushed skin. The room was unchanged, pristine, inviting, and completely at odds with the chaos in my head. I sank into the chair by the window, the one I'd claimed as my spot for morning coffee. Tonight, it was my fortress. Outside, the stars blinked indifferently over the dark, undisturbed sea. I traced their pinpricks of light with numb eyes, feeling the tremor in my hand subside as I forced myself to breathe, to think. Lucy appeared at the doorway moments later, hesitating in the threshold, backlit by the warm lights from the hall. Her silhouette was achingly familiar, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the slight tilt of her head when she was searching for the right words. But tonight, familiarity brought no comfort. "Mark, please," she began, her voice low, almost swallowed by the distance between us. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. She stepped inside, closing the door with a click that seemed too final, too conclusive. "Say what you need to say, Lucy," I finally managed, not tearing my gaze away from the window. She took a deep breath, the sound shaky. I didn't want it to come to this. I didn't know how to tell you what's been happening." "What's been happening?" I echoed, my voice hardening. "You mean whatever's been going on between you and William?" "It's not what you think," she rushed, taking a step forward. "It started as work, just work. He's influential, Mark. The firm needs his account, and Jack thought." "Jack thought what?" I interrupted, turning to face her for the first time. The sight of her made the fury twist tighter in my chest. "That you'd be our sacrificial lamb? And you agreed?" Her eyes closed, a fleeting shield from the weight of my accusation. "No. Not at first. It was never supposed to get personal. But then?" "But then?" My voice dropped, low and dangerous. "Go on." She opened her eyes, meeting mine with an expression that was equal parts shame and defiance. "He made me feel noticed. Important. The way you used to before the kids, before work consumed you." The statement was a dagger, not for its truth, but for the misplaced blame it carried. My mind flashed through memories, late nights coding reports, building our life brick by brick, while assuming our love was a constant. I felt the anger shift, deepen into something more insidious, grief. "You were my world, Lucy," I said, each word landing heavy. "Everything I did was for us, for Emma and Daniel. And you traded that for, what? Attention from a man with too much money and a taste for spectacle?" "It wasn't like that," she protested, but her voice faltered. "It wasn't supposed to be this." "But it is," I said, cutting through her attempt at justification. I stood, the room seeming smaller with both of us trapped inside. "It's exactly this now." Her face crumpled, and she reached out, fingers trembling. "Mark, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought, maybe if we could just reset." "Reset?" The laugh that escaped me was hollow. "There's no reset, Lucy. You crossed a line and expected me to follow you, to accept it. For what? A weekend payoff?" "No," she said, stepping forward until the space between us was a breath. "Because I thought it would make me remember. Remember why I chose you. Why we started this life together." I looked at her, searching for the woman I had married, the one who shared late-night talks and dreams whispered under blankets. But all I saw was someone I didn't recognize, someone willing to risk everything for reasons I couldn't understand. "Maybe you need to remember," I said quietly. "But I can't forget." The finality of the words registered in her expression, a subtle sag in her shoulders, a wet gleam in her eyes. She took a step back, hands dropping to her sides, helpless. "I'll stay in the guest room tonight," I said, moving past her. The touch of her hand on my arm was tentative, and I shrugged it off, not looking back as I left the room. The hallway was empty, shadows stretching out beneath the soft light. I made my way to the end where a smaller room awaited, sterile and impersonal. It smelled faintly of citrus and polished wood. As I lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, the past echoed around me, the promises we made, the dreams that had brought us here. But tonight, they felt like they belonged to someone else, remnants of a life that had slipped away, leaving behind only hollow spaces. The morning came with a chill that seemed to seep from the ocean itself, drifting through the open windows and settling deep into my bones. I hadn't slept, and the weight of the sleepless hours clung to me as I made my way back to the main suite. The island's beauty felt stark now, alien and detached, its serene allure mocking the wreckage Lucy and I had become. When I reached our suite, I found it empty, the bed meticulously made. Her red dress from the night before hung over the back of a chair, and her shoes were neatly placed by the door. A cup of coffee sat on the table, its warmth already fading, and next to it, a note with my name written in her familiar script. I reached for it, hesitating before turning the paper over to read. "Mark. I don't know how to explain the things I don't even understand myself. I wish I could say last night was a mistake, but we both know it was a long time coming. There's a part of me I can't fix, and I'm realizing it's not fair to expect you to fix it for me. I loved you with everything I had, and somehow, it wasn't enough, not for either of us. You deserve more than I can give. I'll be gone by the time you read this. Tell Emma and Daniel I love them and that I'm sorry for everything. Lucy. I read the note twice, the words twisting in my mind as if rearranging themselves to form a coherent explanation that wasn't there. Her decision hit me like a blow to the chest, robbing me of breath. She'd left. Walked away without a final word, a last conversation, leaving only her apologies etched in ink on a page that felt colder than the air in the room. For a moment, the betrayal was dwarfed by an aching emptiness. This was the woman who had woven herself into every part of my life, who had once been the pulse of my heart. Now, her presence had become a memory, a ghost haunting the spaces between her words. I stayed rooted to the spot, the silence settling around me like a shroud. I tried to tell myself that this was for the best, that maybe it was the clean break we both needed. But the rationalizations offered no solace, only the sharp sting of an irrevocable loss. She had taken a piece of our lives, our family, and left it behind like an afterthought. The hours slipped by in a haze. I made it through breakfast with forced smiles for our colleagues, avoiding questions about Lucy's absence. Eventually, I headed to the dock, my mind numb to the lapping waves and the cries of seagulls. I waited for the boat that would take me back to the mainland, back to a life forever altered by a single choice. The ride back was silent, the engine steady hummed the only sound that filled the empty space beside me. Each mile took me farther from the island, but not from the memories that clung to me like an unwanted shadow. When I arrived home, the house felt hollow. The familiar smells, the clutter of toys and books, all seemed tinged with a strange quiet. Emma and Daniel were staying with Lucy's parents, so I had a few hours before facing the next chapter of this mess, explaining what had happened to our children. I dreaded it, the words already feeling heavy and insufficient. How could I tell them that the world, as they knew it, had been upended by a truth too complicated to explain? I drifted through the house, picking up stray items she'd left behind. A scarf draped over a chair, her perfume still lingering on the air, her favorite coffee mug abandoned in the sink. These fragments of her life seemed to mock me, reminders of the absence she'd carved into the fabric of our family. But then I heard it, the soft chime of a notification on her tablet, left on the kitchen counter. Without thinking, I picked it up, tapping the screen to see what message could possibly have reached her here, now. A series of unread messages from William appeared on the screen, their timestamps marking the early hours of the morning. My stomach twisted as I opened the first one, dread filling me with each word. I thought you understood the terms, Lucy. If you leave alone. Don't expect me to change my life for yours. The next message, hours later, was more curt. I hope you made the right choice. Goodbye. I stood there, stunned, realizing the depth of her choice, the painful clarity of what she must have felt as she wrote that note. William hadn't been an escape, he had been a mirage, one that vanished the moment she reached for it. She had abandoned her life with me, her family, only to be left with nothing. The realization spread through me, dark and sharp, until the sympathy was overwhelmed by a cold fury. She had chosen him, over us, over our children, and now, left empty-handed, she was adrift somewhere in a city where no one waited for her. My anger was dwarfed by the tragedy of it, the way she had allowed herself to believe in a lie, only to be discarded by the very person she had risked everything for. I put down the tablet, the betrayal coiling tighter around me. For years, we had built a life together, woven with trust and love, only for it all to unravel in a matter of days. And now, I was left to pick up the pieces, to rebuild what was left for Emma and Daniel, without the person I had once believed would be there by my side. In the weeks that followed, the house felt emptier than ever. I went through the motions, packing up her things, keeping the children busy to avoid their questions. I became a figure going through the motions of fatherhood and work, hoping that, in time, the ache would fade. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees, a letter arrived in the mail, a letter from Lucy. I held it in my hands, feeling the weight of it, the final words she had chosen to leave behind. Mark. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect understanding. I can only say that I lost myself somewhere in our life, in the happiness that was so complete it scared me. I thought I needed something more, and now I realize that I had everything I needed with you, with our family. Please, tell Emma and Daniel that I love them. And if you can, remember the good days. I don't deserve it, but I hope you can find peace. Lucy. As I read her words, a tear slid down my cheek, unbidden and unwelcome. I folded the letter, placing it back in its envelope, and stared out into the dusk. She was gone, her final apologies scattered in ink, drifting through the spaces she once filled. In the quiet that followed, I sat alone, the weight of her absence pressing down, suffocating. The life we had built lay in ruins, each memory now tinged with a sorrow too profound to name. And in that moment, I realized that the future I once envisioned had slipped through my fingers, lost to the relentless tide of choices, regrets, and the silence she left behind.